Good afternoon and welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, Under-Resourced and Underserved, Supporting Tornado Devastated Communities in Mississippi and the Deep South. My name is John Cooper. I'm an Assistant Vice President in the Division of Academic and Strategic Collaborations at Texas A&M University. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And for the purposes of this conversation, you should also know that my research, teaching, and practice over the last 25 years has focused on historic planning, particularly with regard to preparing socially vulnerable populations to survive and recover after disasters. I serve on the advisory board for the University of North Carolina Coastal Resilience Center, the National Academy's Board on Gulf Education and Engagement, and I'm the chair of the CDP's Advisory Council. So that said, let's go over a couple of guidelines for how to participate, some housekeeping notes. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of the panel presentation. If you are on Twitter, please use hashtag CDP4Recovery. That's CDP, the number 4 recovery, to share and join the discussion. And don't forget to follow us at Funds for Disaster. At the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey. Please complete this to help us improve our webinar offerings to better meet your needs. And finally, we are recording this webinar. It will be available on our website and YouTube channel shortly after the webinar is complete. Live captioning is available now via Zoom. Click on the closed caption live transcript to access it, and there will be more accurate captions in the recording. I want to thank our co-sponsors. This webinar is co-sponsored by ABFI, a philanthropic partnership for Black communities, Alliance Magazine, the Council on Foundations, Giving Compass, National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, the Mississippi Alliance of Nonprofits and Philanthropy, and the United Philanthropy Forum. We thank them all for their support. As we begin the webinar, CDP acknowledges that we are working from stolen lands of the many original peoples. We recognize that Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disenfranchised from their land by the socioeconomic and cultural disaster of colonialism, as well as disasters. We acknowledge when the U.S. was founded, there were exclusions and erasures of Indigenous knowledge about how to appropriately care for these lands, causing environmental destruction and degradation, which has had a significant negative impact on disaster risks and our communities as a result. We are committed to dismantling the ongoing legacy systems and structures of settler colonialism and white supremacy. We commit ourselves to understand where and how wealth accumulation has harmed people and the earth itself, and the complexities of philanthropy as connected to that truth. Despite centuries of theft, violence, and murder, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Please join us in acknowledging the original peoples and their elders, past and present, as well as future generations. And now the goals of the webinar. At the end of the webinar, donors and grant makers will first understand the variety of immediate and long-term needs faced by communities in tornado-impacted areas. They will learn how systemic racism and historic disinvestment will make recovery harder. And they will increase their knowledge of tornadoes and how they can support communities to prepare for, respond to, and recover from these devastating disasters. Just a quick overview. Poor, Black, rural, and gone. Most of the communities hit by tornadoes over the March 24 through 26 weekend share these characteristics, but they are also strong, resilient, and proud, and urgently need philanthropic support. That noted, CDP has followed the early responses to these tornadoes, and a few things have become abundantly clear. First, the Mississippi Delta has been under-resourced and underserved for decades. The historic disinvestment into communities, often stemming from racism, will make harder to recover. That's a fact. The high rates of poverty, lower education rates, higher illiteracy rates, etc., all inextricably linked to the first point I made, will exacerbate the challenges of recovery now and over the long term. Rural disasters are different. Rural disasters are different. I know this from experience. I was born in rural Northeast Texas in a place a lot like Rolling Fork in terms of its geography, history, and culture. And Rolling Fork claims blues legend Muddy Waters, and in Northeast Texas, we had Huddy Ledbetter. And most of my practice has been in service of rural places like Silver City. So trust me when I say there are contextual issues in the Delta like the lack of transportation. And these issues are exacerbated by this event and will require new capabilities like mobile outreach. And these new capacities will in turn be more expensive for response organizations relative to places that are not starting from scratch. So funders, y'all have to step up if we're going to see a change and a chance of adequate recovery. I can recall former Council on Foundations President James Joseph saying after Katrina, we need change, not just charity, and we need a reform along with relief. So now it's my honor to introduce our special guest, and I say honor with sincerity, as I've gotten to know lots of people in Mississippi across my career. Ivy Allen gave me my first job at a nonprofit in North Carolina before she was president of the Foundation for the Mid-South. The late and legendary governor of Mississippi, William Winter, was a board member of that same nonprofit. And we shall all aspire to be as great as the great Bill Bynum, I should say. I could say more, but our time is limited today, so I don't want to get off script. I just want our panelists to know, though, that I know something about the obstacles they face, and I'm looking forward to the information they will share with us. Okay. Our first speaker, Melanie Powell, is the Executive Director of the Community Foundation of Washington County, which has been boots on the ground to help their friends and neighbors in Washington, Sharkey, Issaquena, I hope I'm saying that right, but she'll correct me, and Humphreys counties with their long-term disaster recovery needs since 2016. Prior to joining the Community Foundation, Melanie was the Executive Director at Tutwiler Community Education Center and the Program Director at the Mississippi Center for Justice. Shirley Bloodworth Botop is the Senior Vice President, Community Economic Development at Hope Enterprise Corporation. She has expertise in disaster response and recovery, resilience, philanthropy, advocacy and policy, and community and economic development. Shirley is part of Harvard University's National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, a former Clinton Global Delegate, a George W. Bush Points of Light Award recipient, and was a member of the inaugural White House Innovation Initiative, part of President Obama's Climate Action Plan. Mavis A. Creer is the Executive Director of R3SM Inc., Recover, Rebuild, Restore South Mississippi, as well as the Vice Chair of Mississippi VOAD and Housing Chair of the Mississippi State Conference of the NAACP. She is also a best-selling author, speaker, consultant, and women's advocate. Mavis has an extensive knowledge of recovery following disasters with a foundation in revitalization of communities and economic development. Welcome to each of you, and thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with us. So let's get into it. Melanie, I want to start with you. Your community foundation has been working in communities affected by the disasters for several years, or affected by disaster for several years. What are some of the pre-existing challenges you have seen that will impact recovery?
Yes, the Community Foundation of Washington County has been working in the counties that you mentioned earlier, Sharkey, Issaquena, and Humphreys. And the work initially started around the backwater floods. And we are still, with looking at long-term recovery. And that's what we do. We're talking about once all the other organizations have left, those communities will need long-term recovery. We're talking about 5-6 months out to help them get established and back into their homes. So some of those things and some of the challenges that we've seen, I was just speaking with someone earlier today, was that, we take for granted driving down a road. But if you're trying to move a mobile home down a road, it has to be a certain width. Or if you're trying to get it in a rural community, you got to have somebody to move it there. So, you talk about challenges in long term to get families reestablished. Those are some of the things that the Community Foundation does through the fund that we have here. And that fund was established several years ago prior to the tornadoes that recently happened. Because again, we live in rural Mississippi in the Delta, and it's not a matter of, sometimes it's just a matter of when it's going to happen, and we have to be prepared for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you for that. And I appreciate your optimism, right? That 5 to 6 month time window, right? That's a hopeful. So Mavis, as Vice Chair of Mississippi VOAD, and for those new to disaster work, VOAD stands for Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. You've been holding daily calls with organizations within the state and some coming in from outside. Tell us more about how VOAD works and what you're seeing on the ground.
Yes, I have served with the VOAD probably for about 6 years, but it is a network, I would like to say, of people within the state that are serving people following disasters. So it might be organizations like the Mississippi Department of Human Services, rebuild organizations, Mennonite Disaster Services, the Baptist Association, but it's all a network, sometimes more than 100 organizations that come together and respond specifically to disaster. So a lot of times when we have disasters within the state of Mississippi, many people do not know that there is a collective and collaborative effort from when the disaster happens. So we get to put the call out and say what the needs are, but it is a constant communication from people all across the globe, because most of them have disaster arms, the global networks that do relief. So it is a constant communication that helps let people know outside of the state what the needs are for our communities. So that's why the VOAD is so important. It's a part of the national VOAD as well. And Mississippi is one of the ones that are hosting the calls now. But it just really lets people know who are not on the ground what the needs are for those different communities, especially the rural communities that oftentimes get overlooked.
Yeah, it seems to me VOAD groups not only expand and have a multiplier effect on capacity, but for rural places in particular, it's a way of amplifying the voice, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Just think about it. We're going about and doing our work in a disaster hits a place like Rolling Fork or another smaller community. They're on the ground trying to do so much, but we need other people who are partners who understand already the mission, what is needed. Like Melanie says, 5 to 6 months. That might just be for cleanup. As far as, so we need people who already are familiar with disasters and can take the needs nationally and globally to let people know, hey, the people in Mississippi are hurting and we need your resources, or otherwise our communities are not going to rebuild.
Yeah, let me go back to Melanie on that. Speaking of needs, so Melanie, tell us about the needs you're seeing now in the aftermath of the tornadoes.
Immediate needs now, again, you shelter. People need places to stay. Some of them are with families. Some of them have been placed in hotels. We do have shelters here, but that's not a long-term fix. And that's an immediate need. I got a call yesterday from a gentleman who wanted to support the organization. And he was saying, I saw where a gentleman needed a ride to work. His car was destroyed. So those are immediate needs. He needs transportation. He wants to maintain his job. That's an immediate need. Hygiene items, things of that nature, so that people can have some normalcy as much as they can.
Yeah, so we're just talking about the most basic of needs.
Yes, your basic needs.
Okay. Shirley, I want to get you in the conversation. Tell us some more about Hope Enterprise Corporation, your footprint, your mission, and anything else you deem worth knowing about Hope Enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, good to be here. So Hope, it was founded almost 30 years ago, working in communities of persistent poverty, communities of color in the Deep South, and started in Jackson, Mississippi. We're now in 5 states. So Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee. And Hope became, I want to say, somewhat known for working after disaster, after Hurricane Katrina, really doing a lot of work there in the affordable housing space and other areas. But now when disasters like this hit, we're contacted pretty quickly, which is interesting. I mean, we're obviously not a immediate response, but more long-term recovery organization. that works and looks at the financial side of things. Hope is actually made up of 3 parts. We're a credit union. Hope Enterprise Corporation is a 501c3, and then we have a policy institute. So we use all the arms to work together to move the needle on issues. And you know, in this particular case, we have. Well, I'll start with my colleague was actually meeting with the mayor of Rolling Fork on Friday before the tornado to assist with the emergency plan for the city. So these are the kind of requests that we get even before the tornado hit. It's just the irony. And I think that really sets the tone for, you know, what we're talking about here, which is a lot of these communities, we're working in the Black Belt and now in the Delta. We were already working in the Delta, but I'm talking about just specifically these disasters. The capacity and the infrastructure, meaning like the emergency plans, the strategic plans, the comprehensive plans, often aren't in place. And so when those things aren't in place, it makes it incredibly difficult for funders to invest or put their resources somewhere that will help with recovery. And the one thing that I think we really need to focus on, what Hope is focused on, is, you know, we should never waste the opportunity to make the best out of the outcomes of this disaster, of any disaster. So in this case, if we had renters in the past, you know, how can we look at getting them into home ownership? How can we look at, in Hope's case, we're creating a housing loan fund. Can we get renters, get down payment assistance and get renters into home ownership? How do we help close that, you know, racial equity gap through this recovery process? And so those are the kind of things that we're focused on. And yeah, I mean, boots on the ground. I've spent more time in the Black Belt. I rely on my colleagues over in the Delta to update me. And right now, you guys are in that initial stage, and we still have people in Selma that are sleeping in their cars, and then you know, throughout the Black Belt. So I know you're experiencing very similar things. But those are, you know, that's just a little bit about a Hope and a little bit about you know, what we're looking at.
So yeah, so it sounds like Hope is doing long-term, deep, systemic work and addressing issues that pay no respects to state boundaries, right? Right, they spread across multiple states. And so
right.
let me circle back to you and just ask if there one most pressing need, the thing that's keeping you awake at night now more than anything else, can you put your finger on that?
Yeah, I mean, it does come back to shelter, to home ownership, to getting people in stable living environments. I mean, you can't accomplish anything else if you don't have a place to live, and it's really difficult to build generational wealth when you don't own anything. So for me, it's looking at that, and we all know these tornadoes, the majority of the homes they destroy are substandard. So let's build strong homes. We know what that looks like. I mean, we worked on that after Hurricane Katrina. We worked with Oprah Winfrey. She funded a program that we did in Biloxi to build affordable, safe, well-designed homes. Why aren't we doing this? You know, these are things that we need to use federal resources for and philanthropic resources for to help communities rebuild in a safer way.
So you're saying safe, affordable homes ought to be the status quo everywhere. I get that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mavis, let me come back to you. So you're also a part of the NAACP, and we know the communities in the Mississippi Delta have faced years of systemic racism and historic discrimination. So what kind of barriers will that lead to? Will the legacy of that lead to in this response and recovery work?
I guess one of the main things is that most of the people, because of the systemic racism and unequitable resources, they are not on the same playing field as someone else whose home was destroyed, whose community was devastated. So I hope the people who are looking from the outside understand that even if they do get or fully funded with a home or some type of replacement or something like that, the communities as a whole need additional resources so that once they are rebuilt, the younger people will want to come back and will want to build, that there will be some type of support for economically if somebody wants to start businesses or things of that nature. it needs to be additional support for the communities, so that once they rebuild, the people will want to come back. And that's that. I know that's one of the overarching things that have not really been addressed, but if the funding does come into the communities, will they want to come back? Will it be somewhere that is sustainable for their families, especially for the younger generations? And will there be support for people who are in the communities, the elderly and disabled, that they feel like they can rebuild and that they can be safe, and that their families can grow as well? So I just think one of the things overall is that the support, I'm glad the representative from Hope Credit Union is there. I know one of the ladies, we rebuilt a home, and she said even if she worked 3 jobs for the rest of her life, she would never have been able to afford to purchase a new home for her family. Just to put that into perspective. So even if somebody in a community, especially a very impoverished community, works every day, they're still not on the same playing field. So additional resources, wraparound services would be very helpful when we're looking at planning, especially when it comes to disaster. I think this just kind of rips everything, uncovers a lot of things in the communities that have gone on for generations, that have negatively impacted those who are living in those communities.
Right.
So yes.
Yeah, and just picking up on the theme that Sherry Lee started with, that these issues are not new, right? I believe we're coming up in a few years on the 100th anniversary of the Great Mississippi Flood, which I think also impacted Rolling Fork. And so, you know, we should learn and do better. Mavis, let me stay with you. Your organization, R3SM, works in recovery. And based on your disasters in Mississippi, I think you touched on this some, but just to say a little bit more, what are some of the other challenges the community is going to face in long-term recovery? Feel free to emphasize some things you've already touched on.
Yes. With R3SM, we started after Hurricane Katrina, and I'm thankful that I did not start out as a director. I started out as a case manager. Thus, I was able to be boots on the ground with the clients. A lot of them do not understand when we take the assumption that they are have the same understanding when it comes to social services, resources, programs. And so you say, well, we put out 3 programs, we put out the bulletin, but did anybody bother to speak to the clients and the people in the community to see if they even understood? So that is a baseline, especially when I'm dealing with some other organizations that have resources. It's kind of like they just pass the stuff real quick to the people in the community and say, hey, they understand, we did our part. Did you even have a conversation with the people? Do the people even feel comfortable about you coming into their community? Or do they feel like they're being judged because they are impoverished and may, have had a home that was theirs, but maybe might not have been up to your standards? So I think the baseline is dealing with the people who are in the communities and treat them like they're people with respect and dignity, and do not assume that they understand just because we put it out there and just put a blast. You're gonna have to deal with the people where they are and meet them in their communities.
Yeah, and let's be honest, we're talking about some very complex issues, right? And that people don't have to deal with on a daily basis. And so you gotta walk with people. You gotta meet them where they are, walk with them, and help them. Yeah.
And help them understand. And if they don't understand the first and second and third time, you need to have people who are working with these organizations who are willing to take the extra step. I can remember a client of mine that was after Hurricane Katrina. They were all on a plot. It was mobile homes. We were trying to get multiple ones repaired or replaced. And the steps that I had to go through to get them those homes, oh my. Most people would have said, well, if it's not my fault, they didn't have their stuff together. And these were homes at no cost to the clients, but the additional steps that were needed to get them into decent, affordable housing, it took me turning over rocks. So the people who are going to be working with these clients and these families, they're going to have to work. That's the bottom line. They're going to have to work. but it's going to have to be additional resources put into those communities so that additional services can be offered to the people that need it. So that's one of the main things. We need additional resources for the people who are going to be doing the work. The clients and the families in the communities, we need to make sure that they have a clear understanding from the resources that are being offered. And we need to be empathetic to the people where they are and walk along beside them and not judge them and not make them feel like they are beneath us because we might have certificates and all this other kind of stuff. You're dealing with people, and we need to just be humble and to understand that they have lost everything. And as you can see, I'm very passionate about that, and just trying to help people where they need it.
So Mavis, there's a wealth of insight in what you said, and you've triggered memories from days when I was a program coordinator back in North Carolina in emergency management. And I may come back to a question I have for you later, but let me ask Sherry Lee. Sherry Lee, how can funders support communities in Alabama or in other states affected by the tornadoes this year? You're on mute, by the way, Sherry.
That would be helpful. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Looking at the long-term recovery programs that are happening and organizing, like I said earlier, for HOPE, we started immediately getting requests to look at creating a housing loan fund. The purpose of the philanthropic side of that is to create an opportunity for down payment assistance. So when homeowners do get back into homes, or renters we get into homes, they have built-in equity in that property already. And of course, we want them to stay there for a while. We don't want them flipping homes or anything like that. But yeah, I think looking at what's happening on the ground. If I can, John, there's something else about, the federal programs and dollars that are coming to the local level.
Yeah.
That I'd love to just hit on really quickly. We talked about capacity in these communities. So the county commissions, the cities, we know that a lot of these communities have part-time mayors. We have one in the Black Belt that's got a part-time mayor. His wife is the clerk. So it's just to think that there is time to apply for HUD technical assistance or forget, never mind the compliance side of it. But a trend that I see happening that I think is really concerning is moving these dollars like CDBG-DR for communities like the Delta, like the Black Belt, and having them controlled at the state level, because in the past, maybe it wasn't managed the way that it should have been from a compliance aspect, but instead of helping the communities build capacity. So in the future, that capacity is there for compliance. The tax returns are done for the city, because a lot of these cities don't even have basic returns. So things like that. We don't want to take the dollars away, or the resources away. We want to give more resources to these communities, especially these under-resourced communities of color, these rural communities in these major disaster areas, and these are two. It just happened one after another. In terms of this dialogue, it couldn't be more perfect timing to talk about this. And I think we need to invest in these municipalities, our leaders in these municipalities, build their capacity in terms of philanthropy. That's another thing to support, working with federal programs, figuring out, I know there's a Pew Fellowship, there are a lot of different fellowship programs, putting people in these communities for a year, 2 years, training locals so that they can do this work moving forward, but not controlling the resources that are meant for the communities, where we'll give you, what we think you.
I think we just lost Sherry. Are you back, Sherry?
I am. Did you hear
Okay.
me? Sorry, I was on a diatribe. Did I?
No, I get the gist of it. What I heard was that these are very complex endeavors, even for places with lots of capacity, more urbanized places. And so, and this is to Mavis's point also, grace and mercy is required in moments like these, where people where they might have a part-time mayor, right? And someone who is not skilled at or trained in the technical pieces of this, right? That's what we're saying. And the key is proaction, right? Need to do this before the disaster strikes. It's hard to be thoughtful and wise, smart in the midst of a crisis, right?
Exactly. Offer the technical assistance, the training, so that they have it in the future. And yes, there are resources. There is technical assistance through HUD. But if you have administrations that can't even fill out the application, which is what I'm running into, we are asked at Hope to fill out applications for municipalities. I mean, that's how under capacity they are. So that's another, I think, great place for philanthropy to come in and pay for someone to be embedded in these cities, in these municipalities and counties, and help them become, get the capacity that they need in order to recover on their own.
Thank you for that. And we're moving at a brisk pace here. We're going to get to some questions in a few minutes. And I see that the question and answer box is filling up, and I want to encourage people to keep putting questions in the Q&A box on your screen. But before that, Melody, let me get you back in. As a local funder, what kind of response are you seeing from national funders, and what will the state need as it moves, as it makes the transition into recovery?
So as a local funder, we are receiving donations from all over, because again, people have seen the disaster on the news, and they have been donating to the fund to support the relief. But as you know, my two panelists have said, this is long-term work. And not only is it long-term work, it also, as you said, grace and mercy work, because we will have to meet individuals where they are. In my other life, I was a social worker. So sometimes, you know, as a social worker, my heart bleeds, but now I'm in the position of funding. So sometimes it gets kind of blurry, but because of, you know, I understand what that need is. So philanthropists and other foundations just has to know that the individuals that are here on the ground doing the work will need support. Just like Shirley just said, some of those municipalities are small, they need support. More support, training, just people in general. I was talking to a colleague yesterday about insurance, and as Mavis was saying, you know, we understand insurance one way, but the individuals that some of them have been impacted by it understand insurance totally different. So we have to be patient and explain. And that requires time, and that requires people to help do those things. So those are some of the things that our colleagues and other organizations in philanthropy can help with, some of those challenges.
I appreciate that. So I want to move into questions, but before I do that, let me just check in with you, Mavis and Sherry and Melanie, just make sure there's not something you meant to say that you kind of left out in your opening statement. Mavis?
One of the things I would like to say with R3SM and also with the VOAD that we have been focused on is trying to prepare, especially rural communities, before disasters happen, and try to learn following disasters, because it used to be the format of disaster recovery will ramp up and ramp back down because there was no other disasters happening per se. That was the model. Well, we know that model is not correct. So that's one of the things I would like to see, and that we are doing in conjunction with the long-term disaster recovery is preparedness. We actually helped start some other long-term recovery committees in additional rural counties, and that's one of the things that I would like to see as far as Melanie, to get more support from funders and people who could ask for technical assistance and things of that nature in the other communities as well in the Delta, so they will not be, have to rebuild every time, the structure, the format, the planning. That takes a lot of work. So that's one of the things that we can be doing to support with capacity and support those communities while we are looking towards the long-term recovery, so they won't have to start over again as well.
Yeah, we know from research and experience that the return on investment for that work you put into preventing disasters, mitigating disasters, way far exceeds the effort, time, effort, and resources put into disaster recovery, right? And so it just makes sense from a monetary standpoint as well, right?
It does,
Go ahead.
and emotionally for the community as well.
Right, yeah, which you can't put a value on that, right? And it would take a whole nother webinar to just get into the psychological effects of disasters over the long term, right? Which you can't quantify,
You can't.
put a dollar value on. Melanie or Sherry, any kind of things you want to circle back to before we get to questions?
I'll just continue. I want to continue to say that these communities, there's historical disinvestment. I mean, a lot of the things that are happening today and a lot of the outcomes of these disasters, and I'm sorry I cheated and looked at some of the questions, but I want to emphasize that a lot of the outcomes, the destruction from these disasters would be preventable if the investment had been made in these communities. And the fact is the investment has not been made in these communities and they're starting from a deficit. So we need to help bridge that gap, move the communities forward. And that's around, you know, housing, infrastructure. They need an extra boost beyond what other communities need because they're starting from a negative. And we know the reasons for that. I mean, the historic disinvestment, you know, historic racism plays a huge role in it. If you overlay the maps of these areas, you look back and the maps of slavery fall right on top of them. And there's data points to support that as well. So we need to invest in the communities and get, yes, we need to keep investing. We need to keep rebuilding, but this time we don't need to rebuild substandard housing. We also need to invest in building capacity, like I keep saying. I mean, I think that's huge to go in to a mayor's office and know that they have no plan. There's no plan. I mean, because they don't have time or capacity to do that. That's, you know, these are things that we need to be focused on, helping the communities to move them forward. So just using that drum.
No, you're preaching to the choir. I wrote an entire dissertation chapter on the pretext, if you will, what you said. So I know what you're talking about is true. Okay.
Absolutely.
Melanie?
I agree with everything that has been said. We do need ongoing support. The communities were already at a disadvantage. When it's time to rebuild, they need affordable, stable housing. Also the resources, not just housing to maintain the physical, but mental too, because we have not talked about that. You know, there are going to be a whole lot of trauma that our children are going to be dealing with and that their parents are going to be dealing with. So, you know, we're again talking about long-term recovery, long-term support. Those are some of the things that and I say our families, because we're all impacted by what happened with the tornadoes, that they're going to need. And we have to be able to provide that support, and not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well.
Yeah, so thank you all for going back and offering those clarifying statements. Let's get into some questions. And first, let me say that as a reminder, CDP webinars are aimed at providing education for the philanthropic community. So while we welcome all to pose questions, we will first focus on those addressing funder issues. And so that noted, we received a few questions in advance, and I'll be working through that list as well as any we receive in the question and answer box. And so I have a couple of questions in advance. One of them is, how can funders support mutual aid in the needs of community or organizers? I feel like we've touched on that. Is there any more anyone would like to say about that?
I would like to add one point. I know a lot of the counties that have been impacted are working in conjunction with the community foundations throughout Mississippi, and that is a network that is partnering as far as getting the funneling directly into those communities. So that is a good way of start, especially for the immediate needs, if they would like to make donations, as well as the Center for Disaster Philanthropy has set up a fund as well. I think more along the long-term needs. I was doing an estimate recently as far as the destroyed homes and what they will cost on estimate at the lowest 100,000 times about 300 plus the ones major impact. It was astonishing, the numbers. So if you run those numbers and what that will look like, that is not an easy feat collectively, long term and short term. It is going to take a lot of dollars, and a lot of those numbers are with volunteers doing the majority of the long term rebuild. I'm thankful we have a great system with volunteers, but that's going to take a lot of funding. On the committee, the county levels for those organizations that are taking immediate needs.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question, let's see. Here's an interesting one. How do funders and responders use evidence-based decision-making to determine their activities? I'm not going to call on anyone in particular, but be curious to hear how you guys respond to that.
That's a great question. I don't think there's a uniform approach. I mean, when it comes to strategic philanthropy, for one, and I think organizations like the Center for Disaster Philanthropy can help with that. And when it comes to responders, of course, you mentioned when you introduced me that I'm part of Harvard's National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, and there are places like this that are pulling together and have pulled together best practices in response to disasters. But in terms of there being a uniform approach, I mean, obviously through FEMA's resources, I mean, they keep getting better and better, definitely are much improved from after Katrina to now. But it goes back to whether or not, if the county, Sharkey County is able to go through that training. I don't know that they had the capacity or support to do that, to go through the training that FEMA does offer, and what their emergency plan looks like and how often it's updated. So when you're talking about evidence-based approaches, I keep going back to the capacity thing. The evidence is there, the data is there to support the ways that you should be responding. But it's whether or not these counties and cities can access that and have been trained.
And I'd just like to add too, when you talk about evidence-based, you also have to look at your grassroots and what works for that community. Because just because it's evidence-based in a disaster that happened someplace else doesn't necessarily mean that that fit will work for rural Delta communities here. It might be apples and oranges. So that evidence might not work, those strategies might not specifically work for that given community.
That's very helpful. So disasters are contextual. There's no one size that fits all. And even in the same place, the last disaster may not be like the next one, right? And so, right, you have to take all that in consideration. I'm going to go through some of the questions in the question and answer box. The first one I see from Jamie is interesting. So we've talked about the history of systemic racism and discrimination in the Delta, and the obvious, I'm going to say obvious, mistrust that has to engender. And so related to that, Jamie's asking, can anyone speak with perspective on farm recovery, short and long term, when communities are excluded from or apprehensive of the FSA, I think that's Farm Service Agency, and the disaster recovery resources of the USDA? Where are producers turning to for recovery efforts on their farms? And when would you forecast for farm recovery beginning after this tornado? There's a lot in there, Jamie. Anybody want to take on one of those pieces? I'm interested in how you overcome the mistrust that has resulted after decades, generations of discrimination.
I'll pull that part of it. I'm not very as familiar with the farm recovery, but it takes a collective effort. Most of the time, the people that we are advocating for are not in those rooms, in those closed spaces where the decisions are being made. And that's just an honest answer. If there is nobody advocating for the people with the greatest need, then nothing will change. If they're in the communities and the funding is going the same way that it has always gone, the decisions are being made as far as on the political end, like it's always has, then you're going to get the same results. So that's most of the time, I'm being honest, I'm probably the only woman and I'm the only woman of color in a lot of rooms where people are making decisions for whole communities. So that is what we need to just start out. Who are making the decisions, and is it any representation in those rooms? And if there are not, then that's when we as a collective on the philanthropic side and the community development side need to come back together and say, hey, everybody who's making those decisions are not invested in those communities, but because they don't look like anybody in the communities. So that's just something I think that we as a whole, especially on the disaster side and philanthropic, need to just be aware of and just be a voice and stand up and not be afraid to say something and be that change.
I know for HOPE, I mean, being part of what we call HOPE Community Partnership, and a lot of our municipalities are partners with us. I mean, these are the types of things we can advocate for. Working with USDA, we can help with some of these federal programs and getting people in those rooms, Mavis, to your point. And often we're asked to do things like that. That is something that we're happy to do. We also have relationships on the federal side, especially through our Policy Institute and our leadership. And you mentioned our CEO, Bill Bynum, earlier, John, and as well as you well know, I mean, Bill is very well known in this work. So yeah, partnering, you know, HOPE can help these communities in working with their leadership through our HOPE Community Partnership initiative. So this is something we do regularly. We end up offering actually a lot of technical assistance, even though our primary focus is getting dollars into communities. I mean, getting the actual funding into communities and closing the racial equity gap. But yeah, we end up doing a lot of technical assistance. So this is something that where we could help as well.
Yeah, Sherry, on that point, I have a question from Ellen, and I believe, Melanie, you might be able to weigh in on this too, but Ellen's been told that most federal dollars for disaster support are grants that are on a reimbursement policy, but that this can be a barrier for small communities who don't have the budget or funds to spend that amount and be reimbursed. Can you and or Melanie, maybe Mavis, if you have some thoughts, speak to that?
Ellen is right on that. It's that there is a reimbursement process. So where your foundations come in, they can be that fiscal agent for those municipalities, depending upon how their foundation is the funds and everything is established to support some of that work for those small communities that need a fiscal agent to support their work. And that will be, you know, one way of getting around some of those barriers. But again, some of that is just a matter of red tape and capacity building. Those communities need the capacity and the training to be able to manage their own funds, to apply for those federal grants, and to have as a support that they need to walk them through that process.
I'll piggyback on that as well. I had the kind experience, that's a good way, with the 2007 tornado that came through the Pine Belt, to have to manage funding that was brought in from the local community foundation. And we were able to rebuild 29 homes from the ground up. We're actually on our last one. But most of that money came from multiple sources. It was one fund, so one project may have taken about 5 or 6 different funders. So like she said, as having somebody who's able to manage that, being trained, understand the responsibilities. If you don't have capacity or you don't have training for that, when you're bringing all this money in, and you don't know, that's something that really will be helpful as well for these communities, to learn how to manage that amount of funding, so it won't be any residual effect or any backlash in the future of mismanagement for funding. So that's something else. I know funders, a lot of them want to just support the direct needs, but the technical assistance and the funding to provide oversight will be helpful as well.
And John, I do want, so Hope has worked with the Black Belt Community Foundation and Foundation for the Mid-South in the past to bridge the reimbursement time. So to provide funding up front, and when the reimbursement comes, to reimburse us after the fact. So we've done this. We also did this with the pandemic for small businesses. So that's something that we do recognize as a challenge. I mean, when you're asking these small towns in particular, and even, you know, as small businesses to participate in a reimbursement process, most of them don't have the resources to or the capital to put up, or they would have done that. So yeah, we have worked in that way with our foundation partners.
Yeah, I'm reading through the questions. I feel like there are a handful that are related to protocols about how do you apply for FEMA funding? What's the process? What are the steps you need to do in advance to be ready, you know, on a moment's notice to apply? There are a couple other questions I want to get to. Actually, one is a statement from Sammy Moon that kind of is a good summary. It shows that Sammy has been listening as you folks are talking. Sammy says the need to get resources to local organizations and individuals is incredibly important, particularly in the early phases of a disaster. Most often, the local intermediaries to receive the resources and provide the needed responses fall to nonprofit organizations, right? And he's always concerned about overload, capacity issues, and burnout. Philanthropy and other resource providers need to be attuned to the organizational, structural, and emotional needs of nonprofit organizations and their leaders and staff as they are the frontline responders in emergency management. That sounds like an amen, right? Yeah, okay. Sammy, you get a hand clap. Let me put one last question to maybe Mavis and Melanie. And this is kind of a high note to go out on. In your opinions, what does success look like with regard to long-term recovery for Delta communities like Rolling Fork? And someone noted in the chat that we're talking about not just Rolling Fork, but the county that Rolling Fork in other places that are not getting the attention that Rolling Fork is getting. I can remember working in Princeville after Hurricane Floyd in 1999. It wasn't the only rural place in rural North Carolina that got hit, but it got the most attention. So, so what does the success look like, Mavis and Melanie?
I'll go because I don't think I can follow Mavis. I think it really looks like those families going back to their homes, but having a sustainable home and a sustainable community, not just a home, but a community where they have access to the things that they need. When I say access, a grocery store, someplace where they can get food, a stable education system, all things they need to grow a community as well as to keep a community thriving. So and that's what I feel passionately that they need.
Thank you.
I would like to piggyback, and you did an awesome job, Miss Melanie. I feel like that the community needs to be sustainable. That it needs to be funding set aside specifically for the long term after just the houses are being rebuilt. That it doesn't need to be just a one and done when we rebuild its communities. So if the children need additional activity centers, restaurants, and funding that can be pulled down now, because it is a lot of attention being brought to the situation in the community and the systematic racism and the disparities. This is a time where everybody needs to be putting their thinking caps on, like we would say in school. It's a window of opportunity, I would like to say, a lot of times immediately following the disaster. as harsh as that might sound, as much devastation has come in. But this is the time, a quick turnaround time, with all the resources and the people that you know. What can you bring to the table? Who can you reach out to? How can it benefit the community as a whole, so that once we leave or not there as much, they can say Melody and the other people that are in those communities can look around and look at their communities and say they left it better than they came. That's my goal. Anytime we rebuild a community where it's at, our goal is to leave them better than we found them.
Thank you to both of you and Sherry Lee for that North Star, something to be hopeful about. That's all the time we have for questions today, unfortunately. Sherry, are you burning to add something to that? I don't want to cut you off.
Only to Mavis's statement to say that in order to get to where her dream, which is all of our dream, I believe, they need a plan.
Yes.
They need a plan. We need investment so that the communities can create that plan, that roadmap to get there.
We agree. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Again, that's all the time we have for questions today. And as we begin to wrap up, I want to provide the audience with some actionable thoughts based on our conversation. First, remember the geography. These tornadoes hit big areas with small populations. Many rural areas won't get the same level of support from external sources, and they won't have the same access to community organizations. So ensure that your funding supports everywhere that was affected. Number two, address pre-existing issues and the root causes of problems. This disaster exacerbates the previous crises of housing, racial discrimination, poverty. Systemic and historic discrimination amplify a disaster's impact. So while you fund the disaster, also address food insecurity, healthcare access, housing shortages, and instability and racism, to name a few. Third, this is not an easy fix. Okay, we've talked about being patient and having grace. Be patient in your investments. This disaster is going to take years for recovery to occur. The immediate needs of shelter, business redevelopment, cash assistance, food, water, and sanitation, transportation, and mental health are going to become long-term issues over many years. So invest now and invest later. Keep investing. Rural disaster funding needs to be patient funding. Okay, expert resources. So you can find many resources that can assist you on CDP's website. From the issue insights to the disaster profiles, including one on the 2023 U.S. tornadoes, to the disaster philanthropy playbook, CDP provides numerous resources for those planning disaster funding. There is a monthly newsletter full of information and regular blogs, including the weekly What We're Watching blog that highlights disasters around the world. CDP's staff and their team is always available to provide guidance. And if you need more in-depth assistance, they also provide various consulting services. You can find more information about their work at disasterphilanthropy.org. A couple announcements about upcoming webinars. We have 3 upcoming webinars planned in a couple weeks. Nothing About Us With Us, Disasters and Disabilities, on April 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern. On May 8th at a special time of noon Eastern, for Older Americans Month, we will discuss older adults and disabilities, overcoming stereotypes and strengthening inclusion. And then finally, on June 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern, survivor and community-led response, putting people first in a crisis. So in order to respect everyone's time and to keep this under an hour, this is all the time we have for today's webinar. I want to thank our co-sponsors, and to Melody, Mavis, and Sherry Lee for taking the time to share their insights with us. Please take a moment to complete our post-webinar survey to let us know what you liked and what you would like to see in future webinars. And it will pop up automatically when you exit this webinar. Finally, if you have questions or thoughts that were not addressed during today's webinar, you may email them to Tanya at tanya.gulliver-garcia@disasterphilanthropy.org. Thank you and have a great afternoon.